Hi, welcome to the Gary Sinise Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Cristin Bartter, and today we're going to start things a little bit differently. We're going to show you the podcast studio, and I have a special surprise guest, Gary.
Hello, come on in.
So we wanted to show a couple of the pieces on the wall. One in particular that I love is this one.
Yes, so Mac was a drummer, and this is the first day that he began to play the drums. I taught him the basic rock beat, and he started out playing and never stopped, kept playing, all the way through.
And then eventually I like this one right here, where he started playing with you in the Lieutenant Dan Band.
Yeah, this is one of our concerts. I think this is one of our concerts maybe for CSI New York.
Okay.
I used to do concerts, every year I would bring the band out kind of mid-season for the cast and crew, and so I would have Mac sit in, and here he is, probably still in high school there.
Yeah, and then eventually he actually started working for the foundation.
This is Mac at one of our events called Soaring Valor. Soaring Valor, we take World War II veterans down to the National World War II Museum, and here he is working. He's keeping track of his busload of veterans, and this is his buddy Oliver.
I noticed that is Oliver.
Yes.
That is crazy.
Who you may meet later on. Who knows? That's Mac and Oliver at Disney World. Oliver helped Mac finish Arctic Circles, the centerpiece of the Resurrection and Revival album. So there's a lot of photographs in here. Obviously, we created the podcast studio in his honor. In fact,
the launch, the original.
So these photographs here, this was the podcast that Mac did with me. This is Mac in our guest house, and you can see he set up all his equipment, his microphones and all this stuff there, and that's where he started doing the podcast. He did the first two podcasts in our guest house. This was January of 2020, and shortly after that he ended up back in the hospital, dealing with some pretty serious surgery, so he couldn't get back to the podcast. So we thought, let's bring it back with Cristin as our host.
Thank you. Well, it was very special for us to have these photos here, because you can see them when the guests are speaking, and he's right behind them. So, and then we have something a little special over here that is always in the shot as well, which is the first album, Resurrection and Revival. And I'm excited because we're going to talk about Resurrection and Revival today, and a little something new. Yeah. So let's get started. Well, let's dive right in. Gary, so good to have you back on the podcast. And I think for today's episode, how about if you introduce our special guest?
Okay, so this is my buddy Oliver Schnee. He's my buddy because he was Mac's dear friend from college. Last year, they reconnected after several years out of college and not quite seeing each other. And as fate would have it, Oliver checked in right at the right time, and they reconnected. They're college buddies and from music school, Thornton School of Music. And how did you guys meet?
Yeah, happy to be here, so thank you. Mac and I met on the first day of school on a Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., music theory class. And we had heard of each other through a friend of yours and a friend of my dad's previous to enrolling into school. And it was like, oh, you should meet this kid named Mac. Oh, you should meet this kid named Oliver. And I kind of rolled my eyes like, okay, it's a school of 60,000 people. What are the odds? But we show up day one, 8:30 a.m., and I'm sitting next to this very quiet, kind guy. And during a break, during class, we introduce ourselves. And it's like, hey, I'm Oliver. Hey, I'm Mac. And I was like, wait, Sinise, Schnee? And it was meant to be. I mean, and we just hit it off like that. And we started going to movies, listening to records, jamming together, and talking about life, relationships, friendships, and that extended post-college. And yeah.
You weren't in the same programs as Mac. You were
No, he was in the pop program. I was in the composition program, but the theory classes had a combination of students in Thornton. And so that's how I was able to meet him.
So Gary, you've led countless projects through the Gary Sinise Foundation that focus on healing and helping people. And while Resurrection and Revival is hugely personal, it still connects to that mission.
Yeah, well, what's beautiful is that Mac, in the final year, which we didn't know it was going to be the final year, just the way it worked out. But in those final months, teaming up with Oliver, they went to work on some music that Mac had written, but in college, but never finished. There's a piece that's on the new record called Waltz for Addicts. Beautiful, haunting piece that he wrote. And right around the same time, I think shortly after that, he wrote this piece that ended up being named Arctic Circles. The first title was actually Through the Trees. And then there was another title, I think, and then Arctic Circles was the final title. And he wanted to finish this piece of music last year, so he started working on it. And asked me if one of my buddies from my band would work on it with him, Dan Myers. And Dan's a violinist. He's written film music, all of that. And they had known each other for years and worked on some other things, went to work together on it. Then Dan recommended we get Ben Lewis involved, who was our keyboard player. And Ben started arranging things, putting it together so that Mac could hear it. And he'd send it to Mac. Mac would give him notes. Ben would do the notes, send it back to Mac, back and forth. So they had started the process, but Mac was really hoping to complete the process. And that's where Oliver showed up at this magic time, just out of the blue, just reaching out to Mac. Hadn't seen each other for a while, reached out to Mac, and Mac, in fact, Oliver didn't really know what Mac's condition was initially, and mentioned, hey, why don't we meet at a restaurant or something? And Mac had to say, well, I guess I didn't tell you I can't walk. I'm paralyzed. So can you come over to the house? And then Oliver came over to the house, and they started talking, old times and all that kind of stuff. Eventually, Mac said, "Hey, would you listen to this piece of music I want to finish?" And that started this whole ball rolling. I mean, maybe you want to take it from where you first heard that, and then what happened after that, which is pretty spectacular.
The genesis of your participation.
Like Gary said, I didn't know too much about his health condition. I knew that he had cancer, but not the full extent and just how far it had gone. And so I remember sending him voicemails and texts and emails, checking in throughout the years, but it was also COVID, so I also knew that was also in the way. But earlier last year, I found some old photos of a trip that Mac and I and a group of friends took to Disneyland. Mac and I being Disneyland fans, LA boys, going to Disney our whole lives. We would go ourselves, and I found these photos, and I thought, you know what? I'm not expecting a response, but I'm just going to send it to him, and another, wish of, encouragement. And little to my surprise, he responded right away. And like Gary said, I didn't know the full extent. And so I asked, hey, do you want to meet somewhere halfway? Do you want to come to my recording studio, catch up? We can exchange music. And he gave me the lay of the land and said, why don't you come over to the house? And when I got to the house, he told me the whole situation. And I remember saying, obviously, this is heartbreaking to hear. Mac, I can't take your cancer away, but what I can do is sit by your side and just be your friend and listen to music, talk about movies, talk about girls, make silly jokes. And he said, buddy, that's all I want and need from you. And I was touched by that. And I said, well, speaking of music, what is your relationship with music like these days? Are you able to even listen to music, or is it a little too, painful, triggering? And he said, no. In fact, I actually rediscovered this old tune that Gary had mentioned from years ago, and I'm trying to finish it, but it needs a lot of work. Do you want to hear it? And I jumped at that. And he sent it to me, and I called him back, and I said, Mac, this is really great. And typical Mac, he was very humble, almost to a fault. He's like, well, it needs a lot of work. Well, it's not finished. I said, I know, but I can see through a demo. And yeah, it needs X, Y, and Z, but I would love to be a part of this. And he's like, really? That would be great. And so he asked me to help finish writing it, and then we orchestrated it and produced it. And at that time, he hadn't recorded with a live orchestra himself, and he really wanted that experience. And we were talking about all the different possibilities of where we could do it based on budget and logistics and timeline. And he was funding this all himself. But we also had, the reality of, well, we don't know how much longer he's going to be with us. So sort of, putting a clock on it. And so we decided to do it in LA, and we decided to do it at Sunset Sound, which is one of the last remaining great studios. And it was beautiful because, even though his body was, failing, his mind and his spirit and his heart and his creativity was thriving. And he just kept coming back with new ideas. And what if we try this? What do we do this? And he had a very clear vision for Arctic Circles from the very get-go. And that was the very beginning of, the first album. And it was just so inspiring to watch. And then while I was working on that track, he sends me a FaceTime message, a video message, and it's him playing the harmonica. And I had no idea he could play the harmonica. And at the end of it, he goes, hey, this is this tune, Shenandoah. My dad showed me this tune. It's really beautiful. What do you think about adding it to the session and you writing a string chart to it? And I said, that's a great idea. Harmonica and strings sounds great, period. But also, I think it's really important that you are performing on this, because for Arctic Circles, even though he wrote it, he's not playing on it. In this little piece of metal, this harmonica was, at least in my observation, like a lifesaver, because he was able to get the music out. And he is a performer, not just a writer. And so he was able to perform. And so we did that as well. And it was incredibly moving. And little did we know what would become a full album.
Right.
His mom actually, because, he was a drummer, and he was a drummer from an early age, 9 years old. And so he was a player. And then when he got into college, he started learning guitar, piano. He wanted to expand all his musical energy, and up until college, he was pretty much a drummer, focusing on drumming, rock kid.
He was incredible.
But when he got in, great drummer. And when he got into college, then he just started seeing himself doing all kinds of other things, composing. He wanted to write for movies, so he was taking piano lessons, guitar lessons. He was teaching himself all these different instruments, and studying and taking lessons. So when he lost his ability to do a lot of that, and he was able to, like, he had a ukulele. He got a ukulele, and this hand was paralyzed. I mean, he could move his arm up and down, but he couldn't move his fingers. But he could move his fingers on this hand. So he would strum this ukulele with his fingers and play these different chords, and he could do that sitting in his hospital bed. His mom said at one point, why don't you get a harmonica? And he could hold a harmonica, and put it up, and so he started teaching himself harmonica. And when I started to hear him, I gave him this videotape of my buddy Sammy Davis, a Medal of Honor recipient, playing Shenandoah, and said, Mac, you should learn this song. And then it was like, I remember talking to him. I said, call Oliver and see if we should have enough time that day with Arctic Circles. I think Mac said he had a fair amount of time scheduled and that was booked. You should have enough time that day. See if Oliver would be cool to do a string arrangement for you playing the harmonica. And
it was
so,
your idea.
Huh?
It was your idea to do the strings with it. That's great.
Well, I will take credit for that. Yeah.
No, it's a good idea.
No. I just thought that's a you're gonna be in there with the strings. You've got this harmonica. You play
absolutely.
it. Perfect idea to to try to tack that on to the session. And he loved that, so he contacted you about it. And for a dad to see him in there playing, with the orchestra behind him and everything, it was just magnificent.
It was
never forget it.
Yeah, heartbreaking yet insanely heartwarming and inspiring, and we had the orchestra surround him, and he's in the middle, and we made sure to film everything, and the video came out great. And I remember when he was back in the studio, it was that old Mac self where he had the score in his hands, and he would make notes, and he was there to work. He was a pro, and so you couldn't help but be touched. But besides all that, the music he was writing was great, objectively, and it showed so many things. I learned a lot from him through this whole process, but no excuses. Like Gary said, he was right-handed, and his dominant hand, was paralyzed. So obviously he couldn't play drums with his condition. But even when he would write, he'd either sing into his iPhone, or he would literally take the stylus on his iPad and tap in note by note. And the patience that requires is unparalleled, because you are going very slow, and any writer of whether it's music or words or what will tell you that when you have an idea, you just want to get it out as fast as possible before it's gone. And so the fact that he was able to get these ideas down and in that manner was really amazing.
All that turned into the first record. Then he wanted to do, it was so fun. He wanted more music. And I think he had said that one of the main sort of motivators for him to want to go back into the studio was, one of those was to have a day with my band.
Yeah, to play with you specifically.
I love that.
To be able to play with me and spend the day with the band, creating music in the studio. And that's what we did on November 10th, his birthday last year. And it was just the
it was amazing.
greatest thing to see him enjoying his birthday that way and playing with my band. And then there was the other session that we did on November 5th, like 5 days before that with the orchestra, playing a bunch of other music that he'd written, and it was beautiful.
Well, going back to November 10th, we're at Blackbird in Nashville. We're in Studio D, which is this, amazing recording facility, and legends from all genres have recorded there, everyone from Taylor Swift to Post Malone, so the genre is wide. And in come Lieutenant Dan Band and Gary and Mac and all the family members.
Perfect.
And the day before, Mac, being his typical very humble self, he calls and he's like, "Hey, do you think it'd be all right if I played with the band?" I'm like, "Mac, this is your record. You can do whatever you want."
That sounds like
I had to encourage him. I was like, "You don't need my permission. Like, what do you need? What do you want?" He's like, "Well, I'd like to record with my dad." And I was like, "I get it. Say no more." So the way the studio is laid out, there's lots of ISO booths with windows, so you have line of sight of other players. So we put him in the piano booth, set him up with a mic. He brought his harmonicas, and Gary was in the live room with the drums and other musicians. And one thing you got to know about Mac's health condition is he can only really play a few seconds at a time because of his breathing. And we had recorded all of his harmonica parts before those big sessions. We had done them at his house, so we could take the time and not be stressed for, time and budget, whatever. It's like, no, let's just get it right and not feel rushed. However, when we were there on the 10th, on his birthday, something came over him, and there was the song Red River Valley, which is already a very meaningful and sentimental song to the Sinise family. But we set him in the booth, the band's got their charts, everyone's tuning up, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, Mac can play maybe 10, 15 seconds at a time. I'm not fully expecting him to get even through a verse. But by golly, he played the entire song top to bottom, and then he did it 3 or 4 more times. And so, I have goosebumps even just thinking about it. But then after each take, you can hear him talking, and you can hear his smile, even though I couldn't see him from where I was in the studio. He was beaming, and it was really beautiful, really powerful. And I love how the video crew got the footage of them playing together, looking at each other. And it's as beautiful and as powerful as you can imagine.
So as the producer, how did you approach this album knowing it carried such emotional significance for Gary and his family?
Yeah. The first album, I'll start with that. The first album, it was, Mac being with us, he had very clear visions for each song, for the arrangements, for the sonics, for the people he wanted involved. He specifically asked, he's like, "Is your dad Bill around to do this?" Because he was a fan of my dad's work. And I was like, I can ask him. I'm sure he's going to say yes, but let's ask him. And he was, and he's been a huge part of the process. But it was always about, and I kept telling Mac, like, this is your record. It's not my record. I'm here to help you get your vision across. And he was a very visual communicator, probably because he had spent so many years studying and working, scoring and whatnot. And so he would tell me, I want it to feel like a wave crashing, and then before it comes back up, have the celeste and the glockenspiel do a little glissando up. It was just incredibly helpful to me. But yeah, it certainly is a project that carries a lot of weight and significance. And for me, someone who's obsessed with finding meaning in life, this is, by golly, how can you find a project more meaningful than that?
Right.
And so, it's been emotional, it's been hard at times, but it's been beautiful, and it's been inspiring, and a myriad of emotions. But what we've come up with together, I think, would make Mac very proud.
Yeah.
And that was the whole intention and goal. It wasn't to, do anything else.
He was the driving force for the creative process.
Always, yeah.
I love that, and how you guys were essentially like the conduits of helping that come to the end. And it's just beautiful to hear. I love that. Well, Oliver, was there a particular song in the album for you that felt especially meaningful?
On the first album, I'd probably say Arctic Circles, simply because that was the genesis of what would become the next 2 years.
Yeah.
But another one that really meant a lot and struck me in a beautiful and meaningful way would probably be the cover that we made of Red River Valley, for the reason that I explained before, because he was able to record with his dad.
Yeah.
There's certainly plenty of other examples for the second album.
And Gary, how about you?
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah,
All of it.
all of it. Of course, Arctic Circle. So I think I said this in the podcast that we did earlier in the year about that first time I heard that. And Mac hadn't played any of it for me. I knew he was working. He had said, do you think Dan would like to work on it? So we had a concert coming up in California right around that time, and I said, I'll just ask Dan to come out a day early, and you can start working on it. So that process started, but they weren't like letting me in on what was going on. I didn't hear any of the stuff with Ben. I didn't hear any of the stuff that was evolving with Oliver. Nothing until the day we went into the studio and sat. I'll get all choked up thinking about that moment. But I mean, Sophie was there, and my mom, and unfortunately Moira was not feeling well. She couldn't be there, but we all just looked at each other after the first take, and with tears just rolling down our faces, and I'm sitting next to Mac like this, and I was and he's like working, like Oliver said. He's looking at the score, and he's following the thing, and he's thinking about that bar, and what about at number 32? We try this thing, and I'm just like blubbering, like a blubbering mess. And I was so moved by the music, just hearing it for the first time, and I had no idea what they had been doing together. I don't know that he didn't want to. I think he wanted to sort of keep it until that day or something, because Mac would usually, when he has ideas or wants to run something by me, he would say, "What do you think about this, Dad?" But I think he knew they were onto something pretty special, and wanted to just make that a surprise for us. And that was perfect, I thought. And so
Came out well.
that memory of Arctic Circles and Shenandoah, because those were the first two, those really stand out. But then even going at it, like I had heard him fooling around with Amazing Grace and a couple of the other things he was fooling around with on harmonica, but not fully fresh. Like I didn't sit down and he played it for me. He would play little bits and be working on it. But in the studios those days, hearing everything start to come together, I mean, that's why I say everything, because that record is so special, because it was him, and he was a part of the whole thing, The second record is a different animal. I mean, he's fully 100% a part of it, but he wasn't here to be a part of the actual creation of the album part of it. He created the music and everything, but
well, that's actually kind of a good segue into the second album, because when I went over to the house to record Mac playing Shenandoah for the recording, when we finished, I was about to tear down and everything, and he goes, "Hey, can you just leave the mic rolling, but get rid of the click?" And I said, "Sure." And it was a long day of recording, and I'm kind of just relaxing, and he's like, "I'm just gonna play, so just be quiet." And I said, "All right." And he starts playing Amazing Grace, but completely this southern soulful. I'm like, when did Mac become this I was on the floor and I pulled out my phone and I'm filming myself, my jaw to the ground, and his eyes are closed and he is feeling every note. And it's this bluesy rendition. And I'm just waiting for him to finish so I can scream at him and go, why didn't you tell me about this? And he goes, well, do you think we could add this to the session? And I went, well, the session's next week. I think it's a little late, but why don't we, we can always do another session. And then that's when he said, well, I think I'm moving to Tennessee and it might be cool to actually do it, since I'm playing it in a Southern way, bluesy way, to play it with some legit Southern bluesy players. And so then we did those first 2 songs. And then a week or 2 later, he called me in the middle of the night and he said, I have to keep this project going. And then when we started to do the second one, I was going over past files and I found a recording that we were going to put on the first album for Home on the Range, a cover that Mac had recorded on his front porch or his back porch. He wanted the sounds of the ambience of the animals and the frogs and the not mosquitoes, the crickets.
Bears.
Exactly. And when I told Gary, I was like, hey, I just rediscovered that we have another, full take. It was a no-brainer. He's like, we got to have Mac on the album. So
I love that.
Yeah, it was great.
So I have to ask you, Oliver, had you heard about the Gary Sinise Foundation prior to working on this project with Mac?
I had, yeah, because towards right before his health got really bad, we went to a few concerts together, and I remember we went to the Disney Hall, and he was complaining about his tailbone and his lower back, but he was telling me that he was working for the foundation, and that he said it was actually, I'm paraphrasing, but he would tell me how refreshing it is to be out of the chaos and the insanity of the record business and actually do something that he felt was a little more meaningful. And I think that's another thing that we got along and connected on, was trying to find meaning in this world. And so I knew that he was always proud of his dad. I mean, he loves his dad, and I'm not saying that because he's sitting right here, but it's just a fact. And even during all our recording sessions, he's wearing the Forrest Gump Nike shoes.
Always.
Yeah, which I loved. And he always talked about playing when Danny Gottlieb couldn't play with Lieutenant Dan Band. And he's like, hey, I'm playing with the band this week. And so, yeah, I had been familiar for a while, but it wasn't until working with Mac and Gary to this extent where I really got educated on just what exactly the foundation does and just how far the reach goes. And so that was really cool to learn.
Would you ever had imagined that you'd be a part of the mission?
No, I mean, I was doing my thing. I was coming out of COVID like everyone else and trying to figure out which way is up. And I wasn't even expecting a response from Mac, let alone fast forward and, we're making a record that all the proceeds go right back through the foundation and help the people that really need it. And that's all because that was Mac's idea. And I love that. And, he's one of these people that has a huge heart and a huge heart for others. And, he made it very clear. He said, I want to do a run of vinyl and I want all the proceeds to go to my dad's foundation. It wasn't about fortune and glory. It wasn't about ego. It was about the creative process, the journey, and then if people are interested and want to buy it, all the money goes right back to the foundation.
Yeah. How did that make you feel, Gary, when you found out?
Well, in the beginning, he wanted something that he could hand to people, right? So that was his sort of motivation for wanting to create a vinyl. And he said, Dad, do you think I should pay for, like maybe 100 vinyl records to be made? And I said, yeah, I think you should do that. You should make it. So that was the original order, was just going to be for
100.
100 records, and he said, I can give them to people, and if we sold any, then I want the money to go to the foundation.
Yeah.
And I said, that's great, but you should definitely do it, because he was financing the whole thing. He financed the studio stuff out of his bank account. He asked me if he should make the records, and I said, yeah, it's your money. You should use that. Go ahead and do it. After he died, I called Oliver and I said, I'll cover some additional vinyls. Let's make 500. And so Oliver jumped on that and called him up and said, we're going to make 500, not 100, 500. And then after we put the record on pre-sale and the story came out about Mac and what had happened and that the proceeds were going to go to the foundation, then we had 1,000 orders within a day. And then I called Oliver and said, better call him up and let's get 2,500 total. And we started with 2,500, and then those really started to sell, and then the foundation kicked in, bought another 2,500, and now the first record has sold almost 3,600 copies of the vinyl, with all the proceeds from the vinyl going to the Gary Sinise Foundation. So it's beautiful. Mac continues, to support the mission he loved so much here, and surely I've said that Cristin knows, because they were very close, and Mac worked in Cristin's department at that time. That Cristin's been around for 10 years, and Mac would have been one of our young leaders for sure. Here at the foundation, had he been able to keep at it. And the podcast grew out of that when he started to feel like he might not be able to come into the office all the time. He started thinking about what can he do.
Yeah.
To continue to contribute and be a part of the foundation, and that's how the podcast came about. He thought maybe I could do that at home, which he did. The first two were pretty much done in the guest house.
Yeah. With you and Kip, right?
Kip was the first one.
Yeah, Kip.
Yeah, and that was right at the end of 2019, and then early 2020, I did the second one with him, and that's the. Can you see that picture over here? Is it this shoulder? Yeah, and that's the guest house, right there. And Mac had just finished doing the podcast with me, and I took those pictures of him in the guest house, and so that grew out. He wanted to continue with the mission, and just shortly after that. 5 or 6 days later, he was in the hospital again for major surgery, and spent the next 6 out of 8 months of 2020 in the hospital. So he wasn't able to come back and continue what he started. But that's why we have resurrected it in his honor here.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
A lot of great music on Resurrection and Revival, and we heard some of it on your podcast, Gary, and it's available on Mac Sinise's YouTube. So what was it like watching Oliver and Mac working together?
Yeah, well, it was good. I was sitting right next to Mac, and Oliver would he'd go out and conduct, and then he'd come back in and listen, and then he'd be in there, and then he'd tell the musicians what to do, and he'd be in there, and then he'd ask Mac, and I was sitting right next to him just like this, and Oliver was up here. But this is when we did Arctic Circles, and it was great. I mean, like Oliver said, Mac was not just there to listen and to but he was paying attention to the music, following the score. Had some ideas, asked Oliver to change a couple of bars here, bring this thing down or cut this 30-second note stuff in half or whatever it was. I can't remember all the different things, but he was paying attention and listening, because they had been going back and forth with developing it, and Oliver was arranging all this stuff, and and now here we are, we're listening to it, and I was like, Mac, I don't know what you're talking about. I think it was great.
He was the pure professional.
And I was so proud, but they were working together, and Oliver would he'd click on the button and talk to the string section and say go to bar number 32 and change that to a blah blah blah, and let's try this, and slow that swell down, let's not make it so blah blah blah. I don't know what all it was they were talking about, but they were working, and it was fun to see Mac creating. And then all of a sudden when that was over, now Oliver says, I thought maybe you could be out here in the middle of the thing, we'll put the mics around, and you have the orchestra around you and you play, and it was set up so beautifully. Now Mac is a performer. Now he's not in there composing. Now he's going to go be a performer in the song. And he got to do both things. He got to be the performer that he is. And the composer,
Yeah, it was really special when we had him out in the room in LA for Shenandoah, but we knew when we were going to make the full record, we got to do that again. And so we were at a studio in Nashville called Ocean Way, which is this beautiful 100-plus-year-old church turned into a recording studio. And we did a similar thing for Amazing Grace and one other song where we had him in the center and moved a couple mics and whatnot. And
that was Turalura?
Yes. And again, it's not just that, here comes a young man who's sick and playing. No, here comes a young man that's sick, and in the face of all that, he's crushing it on the harmonica. And
absolutely.
So it's a very, obviously very touching and sadly relatable story in the sense that cancer just is so prevalent, and my dad is a cancer survivor. So many of the musicians themselves went through cancer or had children with cancer, and they came to me afterward in tears after the session was over and said, this was unbelievable. This was actually, I remember one said, this was the hardest session I've ever done, but also the most healing session I've ever had, because my daughter had cancer and wasn't able to do anything close to this. So, and I just met this musician that day, and next thing you know, we're hugging, and that's Mac bringing people together.
Always.
So.
He was such a deep inspiration. And I don't know if you both know, but the video of Mac playing for Shenandoah, he's playing harmonica for Shenandoah, has been seen by over 100,000 people all over the world.
That's awesome.
And they comment about how beautifully he played and how much it moved them.
Yeah.
And exactly as you're saying, it resonated with so many people. Have you seen the comments? Have you seen the videos?
Yeah, the comments are unbelievable.
Yeah.
And heartbreaking, because so many of these people are relating to that. And it's very bittersweet, But the beautiful part, the sweet part, is that this is helping get them through their hell.
Yeah.
And, a phrase that I mentioned to Mac last year was spitting out the venom. And it's a phrase that I heard in some interview, and basically, whatever internal turmoil you're going through, whether it's mental health or relationship drama or cancer, choosing to spit out that and make something hopefully beautiful with it. And that all starts with the key word, which is choosing to do that. And you hear a lot about cancer patients being a fighter, and obviously he was, but I mean he went one step further, and it's like, okay, I'm not only going to fight, but I'm going to create, and then I'm going to give. And it's just like, this kid can't stop. You know,
Yeah,
it's
no.
making us all look bad. And yeah.
Well, Gary, Resurrection and Revival is a great success. And now, Resurrection and Revival Part 2 is launching.
The story is that, we had a viewing party at our house for the videos that were made from the recording sessions in Nashville on December 28th at our house. We had, Arctic Circles had been done in July, Shenandoah. Those were posted on Mac's YouTube channel. And then we finished up the album. The album was done. It was going to press that week, going to be pressed. The vinyl was going to be pressed, and Oliver and his mom and dad, and I think Morgan came over, and we had a couple folks over, some family, everybody, so that we could have a little party. We did the same thing for after Arctic Circles when those sessions were over. We had a thing at our house in California. So we wanted to do it again. Oliver wanted to do it again. He brought food over and everything. And Mac was not feeling great that night. He was in pain. So having some pain. So we had a reclining wheelchair that we had to recline him a bit in the wheelchair to find a good position for him. But we put on the videos, and we watched the videos from the recording sessions on the 28th, and it was a lovely night, and the record was done, all the music recorded, it's going to press. Here's the new videos that we're going to post on the YouTube channel. And earlier that day, I think I mentioned this maybe in the first podcast we did together. Earlier in the day, I got a call from a buddy of mine who I'd sent the music to, the recordings to, Raymond Arroyo, who's on television and stuff. And Raymond's a musician, and so I thought, I just want him to hear this music. And so I sent it to him. And earlier that day, he called and said, "Oh, I'm going on television tomorrow night. Can I play this music? And I show this. This is so wonderful. I'm going to have to talk about a lot of bad news and everything like that. And it's the end of the year. I want to end my last show with something positive, And this music is so great, and Mac's story, the way he's driving through these challenges and everything." So that day, that we're going to have the viewing party, I said to Mac, "Mac, Raymond wants me to come on." He wanted both of us to come on and talk about the music. They were going to send a satellite truck to the house.
Wow.
So the viewing party is on the 28th. On the 29th, they're going to send a satellite truck to the house so we could talk about Arctic Circles and Shenandoah and feature the music on national television. And I said, "Mac," and Mac was like, I said, "What do you want to do? We really haven't talked about what's going on with you and anything to the world doesn't really know. The media, I hadn't talked about our situation with the cancer and publicly or anything like that." So I said, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Do it." He said he thought, "Dad, that's so cool." Oh, yeah. And I said, he wanted both of us to come on, Mac, but it's only going to be 5 minutes. So, and I know how to bang out these answers real fast, because that's what we want, because we want plenty of time for them to play the videos.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's only going to be 5 minutes. So let me just go on. I'll bang out a few answers, and we'll give them time to play the videos. So Mac and Moira were in the house on the 29th, and I was out in the driveway in a satellite truck doing a live interview. And they were in the house watching, and the music was being played and everything like that. And then the following day, we had to take him to the hospital. And that was just a few days before we lost him. But he was happy. He was happy at that time. I mean, even in the hospital, those first couple of days in the hospital, he was showing that interview with Raymond to the nurses and saying, and they would go off and then they'd go to the YouTube channel and watch the videos and then come back into the room and they'd be crying. And Mac was just like, he was just beaming, He was getting weaker, but he was feeling good, and he was happy at the end. Mm-hmm. And then, after he died, we had to deal with everything that, just all the planning and all the stuff that goes along with that. Mm-hmm. And I'm immediately going into his phone and looking in his phone, just searching in his phone for messages and and then I'm finding his files and on his iPad and his Dropbox and all these. I'm going through all these, and I start to discover all these messages. Messages that he'd written, videos he'd made, sitting in his hospital bed that he never told us about, that were meant to be found later. And so I'm finding that stuff, but I'm also finding all these music files. And, music, some that I'd known about, that he'd written for the foundation once he came to work at the foundation. But then all this other stuff that I was finding and discovering that went all the way back to USC. Mm. And so the wheels are turning, and we get through. Mac's funeral was on January 23rd. So, between the January 5th when he died and the 23rd, it's all about all that stuff and kind of figuring all that stuff out.
Right.
At the same time, I'm going through his files and just searching for my son on these devices and things. And then the wheels are turning and I'm starting to think, this music is stuck in these files. I don't want to leave it there. And that's when I started to think about part 2 of Resurrection and Revival, or another album anyway. And I called Oliver and I said, I got to play you some stuff that I'm finding on these in Mac's Dropbox files. Some of the music I knew, like some of the stuff that he'd written for the foundation I knew about because he'd written it for the documentary Always Do a Little More. Mm-hmm. And he'd written the music for that, and Kip used a bunch of that music. Then there was other stuff he wrote for the foundation that was in the files that were never used. So Oliver came, he was on a road trip, and he came back to Nashville. And we went into Mac's room, and I started to play this music. I made Oliver wear the headphones, and started to play this stuff for Oliver. And he's like, "Oh wow, yeah, ooh," I can't hear any of the music, of course. I just hear him going, "Wow." Yeah, and he's like he's making sounds. He's like, oh, gee, wow. He's digging it. And he's really getting into it. And he takes it. Wow, he goes, wow, that was great. And I said, well, listen to this one, and boom, I start showing him. So I said, I don't recall exactly when. Maybe I'd already said we're going to do another record. Get back to Nashville. Get back to Nashville. I need your help. So he knew there was something going on when he came, and then he heard the music, and I think was really, really happy, to hear this music. And over the course and then we started the process of what we have to do to make another record. And through that whole process, I continue to dig into the files. So every once in a while, I'd call Oliver. I say, I found 2 more.
Wow.
You got to listen to this. I'll just send it to you. Listen to this thing. And going all the way back to college, all the way back to like early college days, like sophomore year and
That's
stuff.
amazing.
Mac playing the drums on a couple of different recordings that he did for what was probably a songwriting class or something like that. And they go into the studio and they make their song, and then they get their grade or whatever it is, hand it in, get a grade, and then it disappears into a file and never to be heard. So he had never played any of this stuff for me. So I didn't hear it, and I was like, "Holy cow! There's all these musical treasures, and they keep coming. So we start to plan, and that was we start to make plans in probably February, March. Oliver's got a lot of work to do because there's the orchestral work. That we want to always do a little more, all the pieces that he wrote for that, expand some of these things, flesh them out a little bit more, give them a little, like what they did with Arctic Circles, pretty much same thing. There's the genesis of it, here's the origin of it. It's Mac's melodies and all these things that he originally created. Let's build on that and make it great. So Oliver had a lot of work to do to go to work, and we set our dates for recording, because we had new recordings to make, the orchestral pieces, plus some additional music, because Mac was writing all over the place. It was not just orchestral stuff. He's writing rock tunes, and he's writing, I found jazz charts in there. I found an old piece that one of his roommates found that he'd written for a theory class on piano that we turned into it, that was what turned out to be a great composition for a jazz ballad that is on the record. It didn't even have a title. It was just Mac's Theory Project. In fact, it was just Theory Project. Because he probably wrote it, and then he gave it to the teacher and said, "Here's my theory project." And he got a grade, and then it disappeared. But it was this beautiful, gorgeous melody, just that I called up Ben Lewis, my keyboard player, who's a jazzer, and I said, "Ben, I'm sending you this thing. Record it for me so I can hear it. I think it's perfect for a jazz quartet." And because it was called Theory Project, we ended up calling it Mac Theory. And it's a beautiful jazz ballad with a jazz quartet that's on part 2 of the record. There's so much music on the record, 19 compositions going all the way back to college, that it's a double album, 2 discs. Side A, B, C, and D, and it really I'm very excited about it because it's Mac in so many ways. All these this variety of music that's there, from film scoring stuff to even Home on the Range, where he's playing harmonica. And I had my buddies Dan Myers and Levi Britton, who have their own band called Stolen Silver. They open for my band quite a bit, and they play on Home on the Range as well. There's so much great music on the record. I'm very excited about it coming out.
Well, we're excited to share one of the songs, Quasi Love. So let's take a listen.
1, 2, 3, 4. Quasi love, that quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, that quasi love that you do. Love be existential. You sure that's all you got? I'm saying all of it essential. Girl, I ain't playing if it's not. Quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love. I keep trying to check credentials. You sure that's all you got? Residential. These chicks ain't trying to tie the knot. Quasi love, quasi love, it's not go. I don't know. Quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love. Quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, that quasi love, quasi love, quasi love, that quasi love, that quasi love, that you.
Yeah.
That rocks.
I love hearing that. Yeah.
I love that song.
So can I tell a story about that?
Yes, please.
So it turns out that when Mac was working with Dan on Arctic Circles, he said, you know, I have this other idea for this sort of retro sort of what.
Kind of Elvis Costello,
It is.
70s, yeah.
Sort of
fun.
a 70s
Yeah.
kind of thing. And he had this idea for it and sang into his phone, sang the melody into his phone. So that's what you're hearing at the beginning and the end of the song is Mac working out the chorus of the song into his iPhone. And I found that in his files.
So special.
And asked Dan, what was this? And it was, Mac had written a chart for it, little chart, chorus chart, kind of what he wanted a little bit. And they were starting to work on it, but then, you know, Dan got busy. They really didn't take it all the way. So I said, Dan, finish that song. We're going to put it on the record. And that's how Quasi Love ended up being on the record. Mac had written a bunch of lyrics. He was clearly dealing with sort of a theme of that sort of relationship where you got one foot in the door and one foot
Right.
still on the outside. It's sort of that sort of halfway committed love, you know, not quite all the way committed, you know, it's sort of quasi. And he was kind of playing with those ideas in his head. He wrote down a bunch of lyrics. Dan added a little bridge to it. We brought in the chorus to sing the chorus and everything. And that was a beautiful day in the studio with the band and everything. And Mac was right there with us. I know he was really enjoying that.
And that was also the song that you had the idea to bring back a lot of his friends from USC and his previous bandmates to play on.
That was, yeah. He had some, besides Oliver, he had 3 drumming roommates. So there were like 4 drummers. Can you imagine that? Just like trying to get to sleep, and they're all drumming
They're all
on
in the same
tables
place?
all night, you know, banging on pots all night, you know, banging on the walls. You know, what are the 4 drummers in there? But they were all very good friends. And Mac had played. There was one, Alex Morgan, who he'd played with since he was a freshman in high school, and Jake Hayes, and Brandon Woodward, AJ Novak, and Scott Heiner, and then his very good friend Leah Woodward. And they're all USC pals, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have them come out and be a part of this record? And so we brought them out, and it was so very special to have them all in the studio playing for Mac that day and singing his song. And really just very special. That's who all the people are on that on the video.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to see that on Mac's YouTube page because that video is just spectacular.
Yeah, it's a rockin' tune, and we're playing that song in my band.
Yeah. For the troops, for the Lieutenant Dan band. I love that.
We debuted that song. I think we did it the first time at the Merchant Marine Academy for the kids there, and then we did it at West Point. They all really had a good time singing along to that song.
Oh, awesome.
You talk about Mac's range of different genres is pretty remarkable.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the full spectrum. Can we talk about the song "Sweep Sweepin'"?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. There's so many different types of things. That's
that's one of the really fun things about the sessions that we had, is we're doing orchestral stuff, we're doing Quasi Love, and now all of a sudden we're doing jazz stuff that he wrote. And Sweep Sweep was not a recording. It didn't come from a recording. Last year, it was shortly after Arctic Circles, I think. One of my band members and my trumpet player, Kirk Garrison, said, "Hey, who does some arranging and does a lot of arranging for horns and whatnot," said, "Mac, if you ever want to do a big band tune, let me know." So, Mac's brain starts going. Mm-hmm. Next thing we know, he's singing into his phone, singing into singing the melody into his phone, coming up with the melody. You can hear that on the recording. And then as, with any big band swing or, jazz tune or something, there's got to be solos.
Always.
So I gave it to Ben. I gave that one to Ben again as well. I said, "Oliver, I'll just give this to Ben. He'll work." Because actually what I had done is I found the chart, and we were on the road. My band was on the road. We were in Phoenix doing the thing for the disabled American veterans. And that morning, we had some time off in the morning. That morning, I called Ben. I said, "Ben, I'm going to send you a chart. I want you to play it for me when we get to sound check." And so, to my surprise, Ben had arranged, by the time we got to sound check, he had done an arrangement for horns and, figured out the chord changes and all this stuff. And I get the sound check, and he says, "Gary, sit down." So I sit down, the band plays me the song. And Ben's playing on bass. He's playing bass on the keyboard, because I'm the bass player, right? So he's doing a bass line while he's doing soloing and everything.
That sounds like Ben.
The band played it for me.
Oh my goodness.
And so I'm sitting there, and tears down my face, of course, just listening to the song for the first time kind of come to life. And so when we were going to do it and put it on the record, I just said, "Ben, go to work on that, please, and arrange it but let's add a guitar." We didn't have a guitar that day. Let's add a guitar. So we had sax, trumpet, guitar, and keyboard do the soloing. And it is such a swinging, fun, great song.
It is. Well, let's listen.
Let's
Sweep
listen.
Sweepin'. Resurrection Revival Part 2.
sweet, sweet band. Sweet, sweet band. Sweet, sweet band.
You know?
Isn't that swinging?
Yeah, that one really kudos. Ben did a great job arranging that.
yeah.
That and Mac Theory, and he was given something really great by Mac, but seeing the process of the before and after and
Beautiful.
whatnot, Ben really is a fantastic jazz arranger.
Yeah. And when you hear Mac Theory, it's so beautiful. The melody is just so moving, and
Yeah.
Ben just arranged the heck out of the song for a jazz quartet. So Ben, he's a jazzer from way back, and I knew he would crush both those songs. So.
Yeah, he's a unique cat because he's so hard on himself, and he's like, I can't do this, and then it's like, no, you can, and you did, and you crushed it.
Exactly.
And
Like out of this world.
Yeah, he
It's really
all artists have insecurities. I have mine. I'm sure you have yours. It's just part of the gig. But I've seen when Gary encourages Ben, good things come about, because both Mac Theory and Sweep and were fantastic. So
beautiful, yeah. So we've got jazz on the record. We've got all the orchestral stuff as well.
and we got rock and roll. We have, yeah.
Is there a particular song that just hits you to your core? Is there a particular one song?
Well, Max sings on the
question.
record too.
Yeah.
There's two songs from there's one from college.
Okay.
That's a rock. What would you call Gunslingers? I mean, it's kind of a rock.
Western, like Ennio Morricone meets rock and roll.
Sort of, yeah. Dire Straits or something.
I'm so excited to hear
I
this
don't
one.
know. It's great. He wrote it with Shane Fogarty. It's called Gunslingers of Xanthia, and they were just fooling around, and just having this we got to write a song for class. Mac had some lyrics, and I found the original pages in a book.
Wow.
Of the lyrics that he wrote for that and Just for Now and some of these
the handwritten lyrics?
Handwritten
Cool.
Handwritten in a book. I just found it just the other day. But Shane Fogarty, his dad is John Fogarty, and Shane and Mac were pals at school. They were going to write a song together. So Shane tells the story of them just getting together at one of their rooms, apartments, or whatever, and fleshing out this song. They both loved kind of the Sergio Leone westerns, like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and some of these other westerns. And so they wanted to write kind of a rock tune. And Mac had some lyrics, and so they started with, and Shane started picking out the guitar. Yeah. Mac ended up singing on the song, and it's like a rock. It's like a rockin' song with Mac singing. So he was expanding like all over the place. Like he didn't really sing much in high school or anything like that. When he got to college, now he's conducting, he's singing, he's playing guitar, he's playing piano, he's drumming, he's composing, he's doing all these different things. And there's one other song that he wrote, a cover that is on the record too. He didn't write it, but he sings on it. Remember the song Nature Boy?
Nature Boy.
Nature Boy. It was a song that Nat King Cole made famous in the 60s. Mm-hmm. It was a gigantic hit for Nat King Cole, Nature Boy. And Mac did a version of it where he plays all the instruments.
All of them.
And recorded all the instruments on his little programs, whatever it was. And he sings on it too. And that's beautiful. So you got Mac singing, you got Mac drumming, you got the orchestral stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of the orchestral music comes from what he wrote for the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Right.
and what he was writing for some of the videos that our guys do, and the documentary always do a little more. And Oliver's taken, like, there's one piece that was part of that documentary, and we call it The Veterans. And we call it The Veterans because in the documentary, I just, there was no title for this song, but the cue for the music to start, I'm being interviewed and I'm talking about the veterans.
I love that.
And as soon as I say the veterans, the music comes in. That's Kip, like, dropped the music in right there as I'm saying, we're doing this, for the veterans. And then the music starts. And so I thought, well, let's call it the veterans.
Yeah.
So because we took all the music, and Oliver can speak to this because he had to go to work on it. But I said, let's take a bunch of this music and create a suite. We'll tie them all together.
Perfect.
But then we'll have one piece from the documentary, always do a little more. That was, I just wanted to flesh that out kind of and have it be its own thing. So we have the always do a little more suite, and we have the veterans. Should we hear it, the veterans?
Yes, let's take a listen to the
This
veterans.
is one of my favorites.
The veterans.
Pretty epic.
That was
Incredible.
Pretty great.
I have a really poignant memory from that one. I'm on the conductor's podium, and we're tracking the orchestra, and I remember, I don't know, we're halfway through it, and I finally I realized their orchestra, we're in between takes, and they're kind of waiting for me to speak, and I realized I haven't spoken in 5-10 seconds, and I realized, oh, I need to snap out of it. And so I apologized to them. I said, I'm sorry, guys. This is kind of just hitting me real close to home. I'm having quite an emotional reaction right now because, you know, I don't know why it's this song rather than another one, but, you know, this is such a heartfelt and beautiful project for the Sinise family. And for some reason, hearing you guys bring this to life, it makes me feel like he's back in the room standing on the podium next to me. And that's a memory I'll never forget. And speaking of being on the podium, it was also fun to have Gary up on the podium with me. A little scary having your boss over your shoulder as you're trying to do this, but
Thanks for letting me come up.
yeah. No, it was great. And but yeah, the Veterans was a lot of fun also because on a few of the tracks we had two of his bandmates, Beth and Danny Gottlieb, plays incredible percussion parts, and so they played on all over this one track called The Rise, but we also incorporated some of that into the Veterans. And you know, these are two magnificent and professionals at what they do, and these are songs that required big bombastic, you know, percussion, and so yeah, I'm really happy with how that one came out.
The Rise is a kind of very
Patriotic,
Copeland-esque sort of timpanis going and the horns. You know, the horn line is just beautiful on it.
Yeah, a big choir. That was fun.
I called up Oliver one day and said, you know, I think we should have a choir.
A choir.
At this point,
A big choir.
No lyrics, just.
But that's what was so fun and dynamic
vocals.
about working with Gary is that every day you're handed new ideas, and it makes sense. You know, it's like, oh yeah, this one actually makes sense to have a choir, and we had some of the best singers Nashville has to offer.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, and they were so touched by the project. I caught a few of them tearing up mid-take, and we had, okay, hey, you can't cry in the tape where we can hear you, like, but that was a lot of fun, but also, I mean, it just brought the track, it elevated it, and so, you know.
That was the last part of our final recording session.
Yeah.
We did it at night. It was kind of end of the day. Oliver kind of timed the day, so the singers would come at the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we added the singers to The Rise. It's a very patriotic, sort of moving. You know, and I'll tell one little story because I used this example for Oliver when I said what I was envisioning with the choir. When Mac was born, the movie Glory had just come out with a wonderful score by James Horner.
Yeah.
And in it, he uses voices. And it's not lyrics or anything like that. It's just vocal sounds, singing, you know, notes. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful score. And Mac was born, and I left the hospital. He was born early in the morning. I left. There's a story I write in my book about pulling up to a stoplight with the score of Glory on and just bursting into tears. Mac had just been born, and this was the music that was being played the morning he was born, and it knocked me out. And so there's a nice connection with that particular score that I said, that's what I'm thinking about for The Rise, is using voices in that same kind of way. Yeah. And so it has meaning all the way back to the day that Mac was born.
Full circle. How beautiful. Yeah. So Oliver, you reconnected with Mac in spring of 2023.
Yeah.
And then you helped with Arctic Circles, which then led into Shenandoah, which then led into the full first album.
Yeah.
How has the experience of working on Resurrection and Revival Part 1 and Part 2. How has that affected you for the past year and a half, or 2 years?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I always am looking for projects that are full of meaning and purpose beyond just, something more than just ego or bank accounts and all that.
Yeah.
Something that really, because when you're sitting in a room alone writing melodies, for me it can feel a little selfish or whatever you want to call it. And so doing something like this is amazing. And, not going to lie, it was very hard at times emotionally. It was, how could it not be? But also incredibly rewarding. And I mean, definitely the most meaningful thing I've been a part of. And I love that we came back for round 2.
Yes.
And the way we did it, I think was the right way to go about doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable, and what an experience, and it's bonded the Schnee Sinise family in a way that, I mean, I wish it was under different circumstances, but I mean, to this day, every time my mom sees the Sinises, she comes with 3 dozen cookies, like these are for each daughter and Moira,
Great cookies.
but I mean, like, it's become,
Your family.
it's been really beautiful. And I'm honored and thrilled that Gary trusts me with such precious cargo. I don't take it lightly. And so, yeah, it's been a real beautiful adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Gary?
Losing a son is it's hard. And, for anybody out there that's gone through that, you know what I'm talking about. And I think for me, I've been somewhat blessed in that Mac, was as creative as he was, and as humble as he was, and sort of secretive as he was. Like, he had all this beautiful music sitting there, and only shared it here and there with a few people here and there, and some stuff, he never shared it. It was just there. And then when you listen to it, you go, like Angel's Theme, for example. This is a song that he wrote when he was a sophomore in high school. And now we're playing it in our band, and it's getting, people are standing up for it because it's like this beautiful, beautiful melody, and it really is moving. It's moving when you listen to it. And he wrote that when he was, just a young guy in his early 20s, and then tucked it away. And thankfully I found it, and maybe, I don't know, maybe he wanted me to find all this stuff so I'd have a project, after he was gone to keep me busy. And I'm grateful for that, because it's been good that way. It's been good to just bear down on something. I kind of do that anyway with things, but it's been a joy to work on. It's emotional, as Oliver said. I mean, it's we're emotional at home every day about things, and but I know that Mac is smiling that his dad kind of went off on this journey for him, and that this music is going to now be available to people to listen to. The vinyl is going to be sold again at the Gary Sinise Foundation. So, please feel free to tune in. Go to Mac Sinise YouTube. You'll see these videos, and you'll be able to hear this music by purchasing the vinyl, and eventually it'll come out on the digital platforms again. But we want people to just experience the vinyl for now. It's a lot of great music. So between the 2 albums, there's like 30 compositions between the 2 albums.
That's incredible.
It's a lot of Mac music there.
Yeah.
He continues to inspire us all.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for coming on the podcast. I know our listeners are going to be so eager to hear Resurrection and Revival Part 2, especially after hearing the backstory and how this album came about. So, as we do with every episode, Mac will close out the show.
You've been listening to GSF Podcast, the official podcast of the Gary Sinise Foundation. If you'd like to find out more about what the foundation is up to, or if you'd like to make a donation, please visit GarySiniseFoundation.org. Make sure to tune in next time for more interviews, and thanks for joining us.